Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's session of Ask Zak with myself, Zak. And tonight we want to look at an important kit or tool that you're going to need in your farming enterprise, or just basically when you work with animals, and that is a basic first aid kit. Now, a first aid kit, of course, we want to treat basic wounds, things that we encounter on the farm that you don't need a vet for and you need to take care of. Now, I'm going to share with you my type of first aid kit. There are various other products, but I'm going to share with you the types of products that I keep in my first aid kit. So the first and foremost thing is, of course, a good wound spray. That is crucial for anything when it comes to wound treatment. You're always going to need that. When the wounds are deeper, you're going to have to get a vet in so that they can put in sutures and close the wound up. But if it's a superficial wound, a wound spray is a good way to treat any wound that you encounter. Now, the first one and the most familiar one that we have on the market is, of course, our Terramycin wound spray. Now, Terramycin wound spray is a very nice product. It's got antibiotic inside. So if you've got a little bit of an infection inside the wound of the animal, then that antibiotics is going to help fight that infection and help the wound heal a little bit quicker. But one thing that we need to know and note with our Terramycin wound spray is, of course, it has no insecticide in. Now, the insecticide is very important, especially in our summer months. Well, because what happens is our flies goes and they sit on the wounds and they lay their eggs, and that's when we get maggot infestation and, of course, blowfly strike infestation on our wounds, and of course that is going to slow the whole process down. That is when we look at products more like Sapona, which is a very big trade name out there. Everybody knows the Sapona wound spray. But what we need to note there is the Sapona aerosol does not contain an antibiotic in. It's only going to treat the flies and even sometimes our ticks that we encounter. And our Terramycin has, of course, got the anti-inflammatory or the healing property of the antibiotic in. Now, there is a new product on the market. We call it Cura Spray. Now, the Cura Spray is the best of both worlds. It's got the antibiotic in, which is a sulfur base, and you've got your basic fly repellent inside that as well. That is something very important to note there, of course, is it is only registered for cattle and sheep. You cannot use it on your horses. You cannot use it on your dogs and cats. So the Terramycin, the first one that we mentioned, of course, is registered for all those kinds of animals. Dogs, cats, sheep, horses, cattle, you name it, but just keep in mind you're not going to control flies. The next thing that I keep in my wound of my first aid kit is, of course, a good salve. Now, a salve I use in a cut. I spray it into, especially if it's a deeper cut, I use it almost, if you can say, like polyfiller. I fill the wound just so that it keeps the inside of the wound moist, so that the new cells growing can grow and not dry out. In that way, the wound heals with less scar tissue and your animal is better off for that. Now, our next step, of course, when it comes to our wound treatment or our first aid kit, you're always going to need plasters, bandages. You're going to have to see what kind of animals you work with. If you work with horses, you're going to use long bandages. If it's cats, dogs, you're of course going to need shorter, more compact gauzes and bandages that you're going to need for the animals. So just take note of it. Make sure you know what species of animal you're working with. Next thing is, of course, is your disposable needles and your syringes. Now, each one's got their place. And when you look at your syringes, very importantly, you get your 20 ml, you get your 50 ml, you get a 10 ml and a 3 ml. What is important to know with your antibiotic is to know how much you need to inject into your animal. Now, when it comes down to a 400 kilogram cow, you're going to inject about 40 ml of antibiotic. And you're not going to inject more than 20 ml per site. The reason for that, of course, is we don't want to create muscle damage when we inject that large amount of antibiotic into the muscle, because all antibiotics are intramuscular injections. So the less damage that you cause to the muscle, the less declassification you're going to get on your meat when you take it to the slaughterhouses. Another thing, when it comes down to your injection of your antibiotics, a simple thing that I do when it comes to our needles. If you shake that bottle around, you're going to see the solution inside that bottle is a little bit more oil-like. It's a thicker solution. So usually your best needle that you're going to need there is a thicker needle. You're looking at a 15 gauge or let's say a little bit thicker 16 gauge needle that you're going to need. You don't want to stand there trying to get that thick solution through a thin needle into the animal's muscle. You're going to stand there forever. It's going to be very uncomfortable for the animal. So you need to make sure you use the right size needle. When it comes down to your, what we call our vaccinations, when you look at that solution, it's very watery. It passes through a needle very easily. So there you can look at your thinner needles, your 21 gauge, your 22, your 19 gauge. And with those basic things, you will be fine. Now, I touched on the antibiotics briefly. Now, there's two kinds of antibiotics that I usually keep. The one is our old well-known product that we talk about usually is our terramycin. Now, terramycin, I call it our shotgun antibiotic because it's a very broad spectrum. It's not very focused on what you want to treat, so you use it when you're not sure or when you want to treat preventatively. In that way, you can catch a disease before it starts doing damage to your animal. But the one that I always keep is, of course, Chirotrim. Now, Chirotrim is a different antibiotic family. It's a sulfur base. Now, the sulfur base is not used that much in the industry. Sometimes depends on where you are, but I prefer a sulfur base because you do not get as much antibiotic resistance as you get with the terramycin that's been used by farmers for many, many, many years. So that's one that I always keep in my first aid kit for my animals. So guys, for all these products that I spoke about here, pop into your nearest Alzu one-stop shop. We keep all these products on our shelves. Or if you need more information, contact us on Facebook or get in touch with your nearest technical advisor. In that way, you can build up a medical kit for your animals to make sure you're ready for that rainy day, because your animals usually get sick or get hurt on a Sunday. And of course, that's when your vets are closed and your co-ops or your feed stores are closed. And then you don't want to be caught off guard in this whole process. So build yourself up a very good medical kit that can cover all these basics and make sure you are ready for that rainy day when you are going to need it. So from my side, up until next week, same time, same place, have a good evening.